the recording. Or do I do that now that? No, you got it. Okay. Somebody new just joined. Okay. So we started the recording. I'll call the meeting to order. It's 10:06. Minutes will be taken from the recording of the meeting by Beth. And I've noted that we have a quorum. It looks like we had somebody new join, which might be, oh, Kathleen, great. That makes us have even stronger of a quorum. So the agenda was sent out. Does anybody have any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on. The minutes were also shared.
I have a quick question, Terry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do we need to talk about the position that Brittany Young had? We talked about it at one of the previous meetings. Do we need to talk about that again?
Yeah, we probably should talk about finding a replacement for Brittany, for our academic,
just adding that
academic seat on the council.
Who was she with?
BMCC.
She was with BMCC.
Okay.
I haven't heard whether they've hired anybody else. Have you heard, Dia?
Last I heard they were working on it. That's probably been a month or a month and a half ago, but I know wheels don't change quickly. And then yesterday I saw that they will be probably losing people again in the next budget round. So I don't know what that's, but
oh wow.
From one of the faculty members who's on our board said they have to have a library director with an MLS. That's that and a financial aid in order to be a community college. So they will be hiring. I just don't know.
Okay.
I think their ad that they had up said it was first review was next week.
Okay.
I
didn't figure it probably had been filled yet.
Yeah. Sorry I'm late, by the way. I clicked the link for the menu for the meeting that was in the agenda sent out in January.
Oh, wrong meeting. Okay.
Yeah. I've been sitting there waiting for somebody to sign in.
Welcome, Ryan. I started chairing the meeting, but if you wanted to take over, you're welcome to do that.
Well, it looks like you guys are kind of in the middle of something, so if you're
okay
in the middle, go ahead and finish what you're doing.
All right. So we got that agenda item. I added it to new business. Does anybody have any corrections to the minutes from November? Hearing none. I'll have those approved unless there are objections. No objections, so those minutes are approved. Now we're to this new business item of community agreement for inclusive meetings, which I put in there, and this is something that I grabbed from OLA meetings. And it's just kind of a code of conduct for meetings. Not that we've ever had any problems, but this seems to be kind of a trend for making sure that expectations are met in meetings. And I think it would probably be good to establish in our meetings as well. It's a professional standard for OLA. It's good enough for them. It's good enough for us. So talks about your various behavior issues and some logistics as well. Any discussion on that? Do people like it? You think it's something we want to officially adopt as a code of conduct for meetings?
I think it's pretty standard for most groups. So I would move that we would accept it as our code of conduct. This is Dia.
Second for that,
I'll second it. This is Ryan.
Ryan. Thank you. All right. Any objections? Discussion? It's just kind of a procedural thing, so I think it's a good thing to do. Hearing no objections, we'll consider that our official code of conduct policy.
Perry, I just, with adopting this, I was going to put it on our SAGE website somewhere, under the council page, just so we have it recorded on our website, if that's okay with everyone.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to committee reports. Beth's got some written reports in here from the cataloging committee and circulation committee. Do you have anything to add to those written reports, Beth?
Well, other than the fact that both committees met again since then, they both met in February. So just continuing business. I could grab my notes for the cataloging committee. Oh, let's go look at the agenda to remind myself what we talked about. So at the cataloging committee meeting at the beginning of February, we discussed there was a new genre for board books that catalogers can add to their records for board books. We had an update on the cataloging class that's that we're working on with the University of Nebraska. Things are progressing there. We talked about the guidelines for Library of Things. I'm going to be putting that up on the cataloging portion of SageLib. We had a brief demo of the Angular catalog, and that was pretty much it. Circulation committee, at the beginning of February, we just continued to discuss circulation policies. We also talked about that the 50 is the checkout limit. 9 is going to remain as the hold limit. We talked about transit slips instead of using the ILL labels, since some libraries have had issues removing those and it's taking a lot of staff time. I sent out an email to the listserv regarding that. Basically, standards for book processing, best practices was briefly discussed as well. Just a quick update. Any questions on those committee reports?
The sticker thing seemed to be kind of a big discussion. I saw it pop up in several of the Sage listservs the last week or so.
Well, the only thing I can think of is that the quality of the stickers has just gone down. There may be a different manufacturing process, different glue, whatever. It's just not the same product that we were happy with before. So kind of leaving it up to the libraries to make that ultimate decision, since it's their materials that they're putting the sticker on, but also releasing libraries to use transit slips instead if they feel that's better for their staff time.
Yeah, well, I remember in the meeting we discussed the cost of the labels and the cost of transit slips. And if you calculate the cost of having to remove the labels would probably be the higher expense. Okay. Any other committee meetings that we need to add?
No.
No other activity? Okay. Moving on to financial reports. I've included links to the last 3 financial reports that you can look at. These are reported to the Baker Library Board meetings. Just extracted those. We did find there's one error on this most recent report. There's an entry error on this payroll expenses that shows $5,184 right there in the middle of the screen. That's a typo of some kind because that budget line's only $100. And that will be corrected. I think we talked about it already, but $1,500 is our new annual fee for hosting our servers at EOU. And that's currently been posted under miscellaneous, but we're going to move that to the technical services line down here, 6210.3. That already has a budget allocation of 4,000, so that'll take care of that. We might need to grow it a little bit later in the year if we have more need. We'll talk more about the budget when we talk about the budget draft. Sage Cybersecurity Policy. This is John George's department. I'll turn it over to you, John.
Well, first off, I wanted to say thank you to Rachel for submitting the template. It was a huge help. So, biggest question I have is after drafting this the policy is feedback. I just want your feedback on what needs altered or changed. I pulled some of the text out that didn't seem relevant, but sorry, my brain is actually still stuck on my trip to LeGrand. So I went down to LeGrand at the end of last week to reinstall the operating system on the old DB and dbprod servers. So that way we can get the new version of Evergreen installed and progress with that. We also pulled out the old test server because EOU wanted it recycled. So, and so my brain's still stuck on that, so I apologize.
Have folks had a chance to read the cybersecurity policy that was sent out in advance of the last meeting? Okay.
Yeah. So how much do you want me to review this versus what you remember from reading it? I don't know what you want me to say on this after having drafted it. So.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course. Under
data backup and recovery, you have a term NAS. Can you tell me what that is? Because that's not something I'm familiar with. I don't think.
That's the NAS, the network attached storage. So we have a QNAP is the brand server that has a couple terabytes of space on it, as I recall. I don't remember exact amount. And so all of the backups are written to that. So it's a completely separate device. So that way, if anything goes haywire, we have backups over there.
Okay. When you said NAS, I remembered hearing that, but in reading a document, I thought NAS instead. So thank you.
It's all good.
And I did have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
On page 2, under password management, you have the term password history and then 7. Can you tell me what that is? Because that's not something I'm quite sure I'm following.
Yeah, so that was left in the original template. We don't have a way of remembering the history of passwords in Evergreen. So this is a section I actually wasn't sure what to do with because there's no forced most systems like Windows or Linux or whatever, you can set your password limitations for, so many special characters, to renew on a certain time frame, whether it's every 3 months or whatever, and to not repeat. Evergreen has none of those restrictions. So it's going to have to be an internal policy of staff members that we try and, I was going to say enforce, but it's more of a request that, when people set their Evergreen passwords, that it follows something along these lines. Those settings could be set on the actual workstations by the local IT people for, so that way that the workstation itself is locked down. But for Evergreen access, we cannot do that. So that is actually a perfect example.
Well, technically,
Sorry.
I could change everybody's passwords.
Right.
And then
we can
have
change
to,
all of
and then communicate that to people. That kind of the brute force method
Right.
of doing
The
it.
password history specifically is you can't recycle a password in the previous 7 passwords is what that means, right?
Correct. And we have no way of
Oh.
tracking that.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't quite sure that I was translating it properly.
Yeah.
So,
No,
Thank
you were completely correct. So
okay, thanks.
I just wasn't sure if I should pull that out or not. So because I
No.
mean it's a pretty
think
standard
having-
recommendation. So
I think having something like that is a good idea. Otherwise, you just get people who use the same password for 10 years, which most of us probably do. Which, I mean, consciously, I'm sure everybody's aware at some level that it's not a great idea. But when you have to have passwords for the 100 different things that you sign into every day,
right,
it
which is
becomes
I mean
really tempting.
it is, and then that's why I use a password management system. I use Keeper. LastPass is great as well. So that way I have to remember one password to log into a secure site or app, and then I can, auto-generate whatever and keep track of all of them. So, but not everybody uses those, and that's fine. So
It's not fine. Everybody should
Okay.
be using that.
no, it's not fine, but it's unfortunately a reality. Is probably
Yes.
a better way of putting it.
I mean, as long as nobody's following the same password routine as my grandparents who use passwords like password.
No, it's terrible.
Or sticky notes attached to
Yeah.
the monitor. Yeah.
Yes.
So do we
Yeah.
want to make a recommendation in this document recommending these apps or
Well,
There's
I
fees
think the
attached.
wording here is a little bit vague. All Sage Library System member workstations, but we're really just talking about logging into Evergreen. Is that right? On these?
Well, that's where I wasn't sure because we cannot enforce those password restrictions on Evergreen itself. I wasn't sure if we needed to enforce it for the workstations that access Evergreen as a kind of a workaround. So that was the question. To set them to automatically log out after, in this case, they're 15 minutes, but, whatever is.
Well, and then we still have a
makes no sense.
bunch of little tiny libraries that probably don't have IT people who can figure that stuff out for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I doubt the library in Athena has the capacity to set that up without a lot of work or paying somebody to come in and do it for them.
So what if we, instead of requiring the, like the lockout threshold and the number of invalid attempts before lockout, what if we just kept a very basic, like the maximum password length and the maximum password age, suggested password history, password complexity? What if we left those? Because those are pretty standard in terms of, how you set up passwords and whatnot.
yeah, and within their control. So
Mhm.
yeah, I would agree with that, Dia.
It sounds fine to me. Just as
And-
long as we have some sort of standard.
Yeah,
And I don't.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna.
I was.
Yeah,
I'll wait. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that I think that this needs to be. Since this is SAGE, I think it needs to be evergreen recommendations rather than workstation. That's just my sense.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a bad idea to have recommendations for password managers, even if they do have a small cost. And most people these days have some sort of a smartphone, and I know if you have an Apple phone, it has the built-in ability to do password management. And I assume that Android phones have similar functionality, although I haven't actually personally owned one in 5 or 6 years now. So I don't know if they've implemented that in Android phones too, but if they have, that's a free option for anybody with a smartphone to do that sort of thing for them. So
Is the system account lockout, the 15 minutes, is that inactivity?
Yeah, that would be an activity, and that would be on the workstation. So
Yeah, the staff accounts typically are set longer right now.
Yeah. I think
Um,
it's 8 hours for most of them.
uh,
Well, some of them were set to 8 hours.
Yeah,
I just don't remember which ones.
I'd have to actually look back through. So this is, I think, an important discussion. For staff, I think 15 minutes might be too short. I know that we've got OPAC settings for when patrons are logged on to the OPAC. But then staff generally need a little bit more time of inactivity. What's the sense for the rest of you as far as the security risk?
This is Kathleen. I agree. 15 minutes is pretty short. I don't know what to recommend, but that just seems too short.
It seems like we should have, I mean, I think our inactivity for Evergreen login is one thing, but having staff workstations secured with a lock screen when they're inactive, if they're in a public area, especially, but I guess even if they're not and they're not really monitored, somebody could duck in there and access.
I believe that is addressed somewhere in this. I think in the acceptable use policy that if it's unattended, the clean desk, clear screen thing, I think mentions it, must be locked when unattended.
Okay.
And so that would be controlled by folks' operating system, either Windows or Apple workstation settings.
And or getting in the habit of, if you walk away from just locking it.
Yeah. If you
I
know.
actually just have my screensaver set up to turn on after like 2 minutes of inactivity, and it goes to the welcome screen when it's in the screensaver. That's just a checkbox you can check on your screensaver settings. So
we actually already have those for the county policies.
What about 60 minutes for inactivity log out?
And Perry, this is for staff accounts?
Yes.
Okay.
If you're away for an hour, that you probably should log out anyway.
No, I think that would be fine.
I actually kind of felt like the 15 minutes was not that unreasonable, because how often, if you're sitting in front of a computer using your Evergreen account, do you actually leave it for Like if you're cataloging, how often are you going to walk away from your computer for 15 minutes? And if you're out at the circulation desk, how often is it so slow that you don't do anything for 15 minutes?
I can
You know?
say as a cataloger, there are times that I am not actually on my workstation for 15 minutes, but working on an item.
This is Cheryl from Harney, and we have a small library. So if somebody's working on their workstation in the back and they get called to the front, they're liable to be gone from their workstation for definitely more than 15 minutes. So I think 15 is too short. I agree. I like the 60 better.
What about a compromise of 30 or 45? Would either of those be better than 60?
It seems like we had this discussion a while back, and I don't remember at what level, when the system was absolutely timing out on everybody. And that's, I think, when we went to the much longer, maybe that's when some of them went to 8 hours. But there's nothing like all of a sudden realizing you've been timed out, even though. So I think 60 minutes is much better than 30 or 45.
Okay.
That's my personal take.
Kathleen again, I like 60. In the smaller libraries, that 15 minutes is pretty common that we would be logged out all the time and be having to log back in constantly all day long. So I like 60.
I think maybe we should add a line here under password management that use of a password management utility
Mhm.
I don't know that we can require it, but
That is also addressed in the acceptable use policy as well. So I don't know how much you need back and forth between both documents.
Yeah.
So I just have a logistical question. So that the staff in all libraries would be asked to sign the acceptable use policy, correct? In order to utilize the system. Am I correct in that?
Is that under our purview as to, or do we just make?
we might make it as our part of our next round of member agreements. Probably should do that about now. Have everybody sign again.
So the reason I ask that is because people would have to read, both documents, but it'd be more likely that if they have to sign an acceptable use policy, that we would definitely want things like the password management system, those kinds of things. We'd want those kinds of recommendations to be where they've got a copy in front of them. That's the reason I ask.
Let's look at the acceptable use policy.
I
This
think
is the
it's really
template.
more that
That's the
really
template.
more that the individual libraries need to agree to do those things. So the director, and then it's on the director to make sure that everybody
So it was,
understands
yeah,
all
it
those
was at the bottom of the other one.
for their
Oh, I see.
libraries.
So if a library system or library already has one of these acceptable use policies or cybersecurity policy in place, and things differ, how does that come into play in terms of which one obviously you're going to follow the one that's more specific to a specific site, but say one says a minimum of 10 and one says a minimum of 15.
You have to go with the stricter one.
Especially for that particular system that is being required.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But I just think, those things need to be communicated as well.
Yeah.
When we start talking about putting it out there.
Could put a provision in ours that says that if you have a cybersecurity policy through your organization that has stricter measures required for overlapping policy issues, that you have to or may use the stricter one. Well, that you have to use the stricter one.
Right. And I mean, even right here, it's recommending that nobody leave their workstations logged in and unattended. So.
Yeah.
I like the, for example, writing it down.
Yeah. Most of this I just left as is from the template.
Mm-hmm. We don't have anything in here about routinely changing.
That is true. I was actually about to ask if we needed to basically copy the stuff from further up down here and just make it part of the acceptable use policy, and up at the top just basically say following the acceptable use policy. So that way there's no discrepancy about it saying, like you said, password strength of 10 letters versus 12 or whatever.
Seems like 90 days. We change our Evergreen Circ passwords once a year.
I was thinking 90 days seems really short too.
Yeah.
So, and again, are we talking about Evergreen passwords or are we talking about workstation passwords?
Evergreen passwords.
Evergreen, yeah.
Okay, because it still says workstation on there, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, my recommendation is to change it to Evergreen because that's what Sage is concerned about. Obviously, workstation policies are going to have to be set at the local level.
Right, and it's addressed down in the acceptable use where it says don't leave your workstation unattended and all that stuff. So
yeah.
All Sage Library System member ILS accounts. Just in case we ever changed away from Evergreen so that it's not Evergreen specific.
Right.
Right.
Not that I'm saying that we should change ILS.
Good job, Brian. So maximum password age, is everybody okay with 365 days?
Does anybody change their Circ passwords more often than that?
I change my personal one for my cataloging account pretty regularly. We haven't changed the standard LPL Circ one since we got the new password requirements a few years ago, though. So
We change ours at the annual staff training meeting.
Yeah.
And we use a passphrase now of a mix of words that people throw out, and then we randomly select them. We do need to add in some numbers and special characters, though.
Passphrases are an excellent way of doing that because it's easier to remember and you can get a much longer password more easily.
Right.
So do we need to remove some of those options on that list? Since if it's Evergreen specific?
it doesn't do the lockout thing, right?
No, it doesn't.
So that's not something that matters.
Okay.
Just like it doesn't
I think
keep
we talked about both the top two, so the system account and activity one as well.
Yeah, because it doesn't. Well,
Well,
Evergreen does log you out eventually, doesn't
yeah,
it?
it does.
Yeah.
But
So-
we don't have control over it as individuals.
Well,
No,
It can
but
be
Beth
set,
does.
it can be set, yes, by Beth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can
So-
be set by library.
Oh, that's true. That's not something that we control, though.
Right, but
True.
as long as it's set to that amount per library, we're good.
Yeah.
It would be
and I
nice
think,
if Evergreen developers would put in a password update requirement for a certain time span that we would set.
yeah.
Yeah.
And password rotation, because I do think that's a good idea to have that in there as well. Although if we're doing a 1-year password,
When would you be in to get them? And I'll put them
I don't know if having it be 7 password rotation before you can reuse one, because then you're looking at almost a decade since the last time you used a particular password. So
And we don't have password complexity ability requirement, so we might as well take that off.
I don't think there's a minimum length either because it's usually a 4-digit PIN is what it auto generates.
I want to say I need to look at the library settings again.
Yeah, I don't remember.
It's possible that we could set requirements for passwords if you guys want requirements for passwords. I believe that the logic is there. But the reason we haven't done it is because it would affect patrons as well, not just staff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right.
And when we talked about this before, we held off because of the impact to patrons.
Do you remember what kind of logic requirements is that? Is that with the complexity or is that age?
No,
Expiration,
it has to
updated.
do with the complexity, like the number of characters, numbers, special characters, all of that kind of stuff is what I'm kind of remembering. I could double check on that, but I know in discussion before we were concerned that we were going to have a lot of patron relation issues if we turn that on for everybody.
That's true.
Whereas if we just, have staff do this on their own without the evergreen requirement, then we wouldn't be affecting patrons.
Yeah, we would have a revolt if we required our users to do 12 characters on their passwords or more.
interestingly, I think I thought that it did have password complexity requirements as far as length. And so I've been telling people for years now that if they change their password, it has to be a minimum number of characters. Because I thought it did actually require that.
No. Unless specific libraries have requested that, since it is in library settings, they have control over that.
Well, even though we don't have control over some of these, I think those are still good standards. Should we move on? So implementing this, even though this was sent to the user council as attachments, and I included it in the agenda here that was sent to the general membership, I think we probably should do some more alerts to the general membership that this policy is up for adoption. They should become familiar with it. I'm not sure that we should go ahead and approve it today. I mean, we only have a small portion of our council here and no general membership, and we haven't had any discussion. We have another meeting in March, so not too long, no, not too far in the future. So I think we should probably share this out to the general membership some more before we adopt it.
I agree. I just got to thinking, you know, we changed the wording about the ILS workstation, or however we phrased it there. I think we need to go through the entire document and change anything that references that same way, because I know there are some other places that I remember vaguely looking back, and I think on page 1 there's a couple of potential places that way too. So I think before we post it someplace, I think we need, and then also that under the password requirements here, I think we need to also make sure that that verbiage there is also in the acceptable use policy, because there are a couple things that are a little bit different on that front document compared to the second one.
Okay.
Just a couple of thoughts.
John, do you want to tidy that
I'll
up
take care
and
of
make
that.
it consistent? And then
Yeah.
we'll share it back out to the membership.
Yeah. Can you send me a copy of the slightly edited one so I can do that?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Should be able to download this, I think, if I put it in the chat.
Okay.
All right. Back to the agenda.
Yep, got it.
We're at Evergreen Software Upgrade Update. We had some SIP connectivity issues, and I think, Baker, we're still having trouble with our computer management system being stable.
With Comprise?
With Comprise.
Huh.
Our IT
Yeah, I got
guy's
an
been...
email from them, and they asked if it was still an issue, and I hadn't heard anything. So I was going to reach out to Jim.
But it's only certain workstations, right, Perry? Some workstations are working okay and others not? Or locations? Okay.
I'm afraid I don't have good information about that. Jim's been out on sick leave for a while, so.
Oh, okay. I was going to say I hadn't gotten specific details about what the issues were. So
Are we the only ones that have persistent unresolved issues that you know of?
yeah, I haven't heard anything from anybody else.
Okay.
So
great.
So John mentioned earlier that he took a trip to EOU to install software on our old servers, and that's because we're hoping to utilize the old servers for a test environment. That test environment was a step that Equinox wanted us to take. Before we did our upgrade, they wanted to make sure that all of our data was going to translate okay into the new software versions, into the new software version that we're hoping to upgrade to. And so last time I heard, John, you were waiting to hear back from Equinox to see
yes,
whether they wanted us to install the Evergreen software or they wanted to do that on our behalf. We do have
correct.
remote access, so everything's set to go. We're just waiting on some response back from Equinox, and then we can move forward.
Yeah. And I set up both of the servers just in case for some reason we need a redundant one, or if we decide down the road that we want to use the other one for another purpose. So that way it's already set up. So I probably should mention the reason I had to go down is because of the new contract with EOU. They don't support any work like that on servers that aren't covered by a warranty. And because those two servers are well out of warranty range, I had to go down there to physically install it. So So I figured it was best to do both at once rather than make the trip a second time. So
Yeah, and I feel like these old servers are still useful, especially in a test environment. Hated to see the money we spent on them originally go to waste, and so I felt like it was the right move to make, so that we could utilize existing equipment that we'd already paid for.
yeah, we are going to need to have a pay for network adapters for them because they need to be moved into the data center where all the new equipment is before July. So that it was like $120 or something like that
Yeah.
per server. So it shouldn't be an issue. And the NAS is currently in the old location as well. So I'll need to make it, as I recall, it already has a built-in 10 gigabit connection. So
Yeah,
that shouldn't have an added cost.
the NAS is newer, so I think it was already capable of
Well,
handling.
I'm pretty sure that was part of the requirements of selecting it. So,
Okay.
and that's easy to check. So I'll check that. I did pull out the really old test server. They wanted it recycled. So I asked Beth if I could have it. I haven't done anything with it. It's just sitting in storage at the moment because I wanted to obviously verify that with you guys first to find out how to proceed with that as well. So.
Yeah, the age of that server, it's a small server. We got that before we actually even migrated to Sage back in 2010. So it is very old in terms of computer hardware. But I did tell John, I asked him to physically remove it since that's what EOU wanted us to do. And then we were going to check with Sage Council as to whether you have any objections to John just using it or what you wanted to do with it, actually.
Yeah.
Better than e-waste.
That's kind of what
Is there
I was thinking, yeah.
If it was to be sold, say like on eBay or something, is there a value of some?
Yes. I think it was like $100, but then shipping is, because they're so heavy, is like $80. So it's more of, I don't know if it's, I can find a comparable cost and share that with the council if you would like.
I'm not concerned about it. I think it would cost more in time and labor than it would be worth. So I would just consider it discarded.
I would agree as well.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Okay, are we ready for Sage budget? All right, let's move to that. I'll throw up the links to that. My computer's not showing it to me right now. Let me try to get it. Okay, there's the fees. Maybe I haven't uploaded that one. So I'll get to my original.
Would it help to grab the attachment you sent to me, Perry?
No, I can grab it here.
Okay.
Okay. So just to orient you real quick, over on the left here is our current year adopted budget, and I filled in the actual year to date. Figures were in line with all of our expenditures so far. No major adjustments needed that I can see at this moment. Here's where we posted that $1,500, as I mentioned, the hosting fee to EOU under technical services. So I've increased that next year to $5,500. Our history in that line has ranged 45,000 one year, I think, but average around 4,000. All right. So the proposal on the right of the category labels here in that first column, we expect to have about 175,000 carryover, which includes our operations reserve that we need and contingency reserves. Membership dues I've put in as 245,000, and that's created to cover the operations costs that are expenses less what we get reimbursed from the state for courier. The courier grant, we've budgeted 61,000 this year. Next year, I expect we'll have a courier increase of 10,000, and then splitting that cost between the grant and Sage membership. So 5,000 more on the grant and 5,000 contribution from the membership. And Beth and I need to discuss that more. This is just still the early draft. We'll get together before the March meeting and finalize that. But since we haven't had a chance to talk about it, Beth, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that looks good. I'm going to be pulling together some figures in a spreadsheet. Our biggest increase has been the Ontario area. XPAC last year indicated that we were going to have to pay 12,000 more than the close to 4,000 that we were paying for 2-day-a-week service in Ontario. That would have been 16,000. We did find another courier solution, but that's going to end up being around 12,000, a little over $12,000 a year for 2 days a week for that courier service. So a significant increase that we haven't seen in other areas, but I did find out from Orbis Cascade that they expect our Orbis Cascade fees to go up 4%. So I'm going to be taking that into consideration along with the Ontario increase and projecting what our courier expenses are going to be. Courier grant application is due by February 28th. So I'll be working on that between now and then. Obviously increasing the amount we're requesting from LSTA and proposing that we increase our Sage portion as well.
Okay, so more work to come on that. That actually may go up, I guess, is what I'm hearing if we don't have any other options for Ontario. So courier is one of our major cost drivers that we're looking at this year. PERS is benefits not supposed to be much of a cost driver. They seem to have done well. Haven't heard from health benefits quotes yet, so I don't know about that, but Inflation, as we know, is crazy. It's at 7.9 for the last 12 months. So I have based this budget projection for salary increase on 6.5%. Supposedly, factors are supposed to decrease the inflationary pressure and maybe bring that down a little bit. We generally don't stay directly in line with the inflation rate, about a point behind. So 6.5% is what I've got that at. We can certainly discuss whether that's appropriate or another figure. And that brings the salary for Beth up to 80,000. Remember, she's contractor now, so there aren't any retirement, or no, there is retirement, but there aren't any other payroll expenses in there and benefits. And we actually are still about $20,000, I think, low on that. 80,000 is really what our target should be for the base salary, and probably more than that, because 80,000 was the kind of quote that Brent gave us for a market rate for someone with these kind of skills, if we were to look at replacing Beth. So say, we don't have Beth in this next year, we would have to try to recruit somebody for this money. If we had benefits rolled in here, benefits are 25,000, so their base salary is around 60,000, and that's getting somebody to operate our system for that. It could be a struggle. And I just think it would be a real pity if we were to then hire somebody that was new, pay them more than we're willing to pay Beth. So how do we generate $20,000 more without negatively impacting our at-risk members that don't have well funding? I think probably we would have to look at some kind of an assessment on our larger members that currently pay more than $10,000. There's 11 of them. We'd probably have to split that out, say increase each of their fees by $2,000 or $3,000 each. So that's what would be the scenario in an emergency situation, basically. So that 6.5 is also applied to John's salary. That brings that line up to 71,250. Other lines I haven't done any changes to, except for, as I said, the courier. Increased that from 96,000 to 106. And I've kept the contingency and capital outlay lines the same. Going back to the other sheet, we'll look at the SAGE fees. I've updated the SAGE fee schedule. I don't think I put this in the chat yet. With population, service populations, you can find that on this tab of average master. We look at the past 3 years and the changes and use that as the calculation for the service population. One thing to know about the service population is that the change here is also related to the ratio of that member's percentage according to the whole. So even though one library's population might have not changed at all this last year, say another member service area lost population, that would mean the one that didn't change actually shows as a growth. Does that make sense? I know it's confusing. So that percentage of the change is used on this variable option here. We have the two options for the fees to get to our 245,000 target to cover our costs. One is a flat rate of 7.5%. The other is a variable rate. We have to use a different base rate because of the pluses and minuses just to make the 245. So basically the change plus or minus is on this variable rate subtracted from the, or added to the 9%. And that's how we get to their rate. So that means that some of these members are paying, have their rates decreased. And some of them are increased by 11% or more. So those are our two options for figuring out a fee rates for memberships.
And the current fiscal year that we're in, we did elect to go with the growth rate fee schedule.
You're right. Yes, we did that last year. And there's actually the biggest changes really in the community colleges, I think. And schools. Huntington, you see here, has quite a bit of a reduction. We actually hadn't changed the population figures during the pandemic because things were so unstable and we didn't have good data. So the update changed those quite a bit. That accounts to some of these big variances from last year. BMCC and Columbia Gorge, the population figures prior to me updating them were quite a bit larger than what they are now. You can see they've been reduced by 14 and 16%. So again, any discussion? Beth and I will get together and refine the budget, and we'll present a final draft at the March meeting. Any preference right now between the variable rate or the flat rate? My preference is for the variable rate because as populations grow, then it makes sense that the fees grow with that. We're basing it on the service population. So the growth populations we're seeing, the Dalles, Umatilla, we know those areas are growing. Hermiston's really growing.
The growth rate with the adjustment for population does also allow libraries to get a little bit cheaper as their population shrinks too.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Oregon Trail Library District has a big increase. Ontario, and property values are going up as well. So it makes sense if more people are moving to an area, property values are going to go up. Hopefully the libraries in that region are going to get more funding as well.
Yeah.
No, I agree. The growth rate makes more sense, and we've obviously set a precedent by moving with it last year, and I think it's better to continue with it rather than go back to the fixed rate.
Okay. Oh, no other discussion on that. We will revisit that at the March meeting. Now we're at replacement for Brittany Young, BMCC. The position's being advertised. Is that what I understood?
Yeah, I think I saw it was on one of the listserv things a couple months ago, and I think they were or will be closing it right in the middle of February here somewhere. So,
Should I send
or
out?
not closing it, but starting application reviews rather.
Should I send something out to the community colleges that have staffing to see if anybody's willing to take that position on the council?
I think that would be a good idea
Okay.
because we've had no one in that position for all of the fiscal year so far. We looked at some other options, but then we were losing people in other places at the time too. Because didn't Marcia say she would take it? And as she did, then she left as well
Mm-hmm.
from Klamath. Yeah.
And there is somebody at, well, like it's Klamath, isn't there?
Yeah.
A new
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, that's Maribel. She's with us today, attending
Maribel.
the meeting, and she's new at Klamath. So basically, I'll be emailing her as well as Dylan at CGCC and TVCC to see who's willing to volunteer to be the academic seat on the council, and go from there. Until we get somebody at BMCC, I don't know that that can really be part of the mix. They're going to also be busy getting acquainted with a new position, and getting acquainted with Sage might take some time. So I'm hoping we'll get a volunteer from the existing staff at community colleges.
Okay. And that is the last of our agenda items. Any final discussion? Hearing none, the meeting's closed. Thanks for attending, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Take care, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye.